Hi there. In this lecture, I'm going to explain the course and our objectives and some of the strategies that you'll need to employ to complete the assignments. Now, in this class, like all online classes, most of the content will come out to you through D2L. This actually is an image of the old design and layout, and I much prefer the new design, which is much easier to read and see. But that said, the basic structure and organization is the same as before. I use the news feed to regularly post new content. The news feed, like a regular class, you'd come in and you would see what we were working on. I'll post updates and comments and other information about assignments and discussions and lectures can be all found in the news feed. Be sure to check that out regularly with links to all the different readings and things that you'll need for the class. I also will use D2L for the grade book. And I found that the D2L gradebook will organize and have all of your grades. You can track those on the D2L gradebook. I use Turnitin.com for submitting assignments. You must register for Turnitin yourself, and you will log in and put the name that you normally want to be addressed as, and use the email that you check regularly. If you use your EIU account on a daily basis, then use your EIU account. If you don't use that and you have another email you prefer, when you sign in to Turnitin, be sure to use that. This is the way I'm going to communicate to you. I'm going to send you your grades for each assignment through the email account that you set up in Turnitin.com. Please be sure to only create one account. And if you forget your password, reset it. Don't create a new account, as I need to be able to keep your assignments all in one place. I also need to present you images. And here's a web page that I have created, the image collection. And here you'll see a number of images for our first half of the class. In the image collection, you see a series of thumbnails. You can click on the thumbnails and look at the pictures more closely. Notice that each picture is only identified by an image code. And we're going to use that image code when we talk about the image. You don't need to put the actual image into your paper. All you need to do is be sure you carefully copy and paste the image code into your paper, and I will know which image you are talking about. So let's talk about images. A lot of the pictures in there we show you, I'm going to ask you to sort of identify them, and you're going to have to sort of figure out what they are. Now, some of them may be directly from the lectures, some of them may be from our readings or from other sources of information you may have, or some of them may be similar to things that you've seen in the readings, the lectures, or other materials. But still, not all the information will be readily available. So it's very important in this class that you practice close looking at these images, that you analyze them and you don't make assumptions about information you're not certain about. Okay, I'm going to ask you to look closely, but I'm also asking you to be sure to check your facts and do your research. Okay, this is not about speculation. This is about observing and knowing what you're looking at. All right, so here's a picture. And what can we say just by looking at it? Well, it's a pair of soldiers. One is holding a gun to the other one's head, right? And we see it's got a black sky. Maybe it's at night where this is happening. And the soldiers are wearing camp gear that looks something like World War II. So that's sort of what we can just sort of assume from what we've seen, all right? Now, looking closer, we can see down below that there is the artist's signature, and if you carefully read it, it means Bill Malden, all right, who is the artist who created it. And you also notice that there's a caption, "Didn't we meet at casino?" Okay, and it's in quotations. It's handwritten. So this is probably a copy of the original work of art. It's not what it looked like when it was printed in a newspaper. Okay, so we're looking at something that was hand painted. You can also see some unevenness in the black above the soldiers' heads, also suggesting what you're looking at is not a printed copy, but actually something that was hand done. So we can talk about now the style of the drawing. Well, it's fairly realistic. There's attention to close details on the camp gear and the uniforms. Clearly, this is someone who's very familiar with soldiers' life and soldiers' customs. There's also a kind of a looseness. Look at the way that the mud is painted with splashes of ink. There's a kind of roughness, a quickness about it that is very decisive. Okay, and this is ink. This is pen and ink, or brush ink. So he's using a brush to paint in India ink onto a piece of paper. So we know the name of the artist. We know the period roughly. We can start to look up some information online or look in our textbook through the index, and you might start to learn something about this particular image, right? So what can you learn? You can learn that Bill Mauldin was an artist who worked for the Navy, the Army. He was a soldier who made comics while he was on combat duty. Okay, so this is done from about 1945. It's a pen and ink drawing, and it was done in the Italian front in World War II, hence the reference to Cassino, which is a town in Italy that there was a very important battle. All right. So there's some of the basic primary descriptions of what we're looking at, all right, that tells us something about the picture itself, that one singular picture. Now we want to kind of go back a little, step back a little bit, and look at what it says about pictures like it at that time and other pictures that were done by this artist and other artists that may be related to this. We call this secondary descriptive information. So this is a humor comic, right? It's supposed to be funny. And it was funny to soldiers who were reading Stars and Stripes publication, right? In the mid-20th century during World War II. And it's a humor for ordinary soldiers, people who would have been very familiar with what it was like to live in the trenches, and the people who were sympathetic to the concerns of those people living in the trenches and fighting in the trenches. The style is loose, sketchy background, detailed camp code. In camp code, he's also really sort of familiar with the personalities of these soldiers. They're kind of ironic and they're cynical. And we're going now into a kind of tertiary, the furthest sort of broadest things, the influences. One of the things that you know about Bill Mauldin was he was really into the real story about soldiers and their rough lives, their beards, their humble heroics. They're not doing grand, dramatic things. They're just kind of trying to get by with a clean pair of socks. And so the focus is on the characters and their personalities and their real life experiences. So that's sort of our kind of three-part descriptions. Every comic image has different kinds of information, and you may or may not be able to answer all of these kinds of information depending on the picture. The important thing is to try and get at least some information from each of these three different characteristics, okay? Primary, secondary, and tertiary. All right, now that we've identified our one picture, we're going to start making comparisons. This is very important because what we're doing is really like trying to make a puzzle. We're not just going to talk about one picture. We have to start talking about how they fit together. And to do that, you need to see what things line up next to each other. So we can talk about this image in relation to other images that Bill Mauldin made at the same time. Okay? And we see when we compare them similar characteristics. We can see his treatment of the characters. We can see his treatment of the backgrounds. We can see the kinds of humor and other examples of this. This is a similar or same comparison that's being made in this. It's a very basic comparison, but it is a comparison. It's not going to tell us a whole lot, but it will allow us to sort of tease out some subtleties in the range of work that he did at this time. Another thing you can do is start looking at art that was earlier that might have influenced Bill Mauldin. And one of them was very popular at this time were adventure stories, adventure comics, Terry and the Pirates. And you can start to see the treatment of the backgrounds, the realistic and the dramatic use of inks and the characters and the realistic camp gear. That was probably coming into Bill Mauldin's experience that he was translating into his war characters. Okay, so where does this comic come from? Next, we want to start looking at other people who were also in the war but didn't quite go into war comics, but still have a kind of interesting take on the use of ink and characters. Jack Kirby, of course, you've probably heard about him if you're really a big comics fan. Is very important in the 1960s for his designs of characters and his very unique style that he developed. And so he was also in the war. He was also a part of that generation, Bill Mauldin's generation, but his direction was quite different. He decided to make this kind of superhero designs. He's most famous for his Silver Surfer. You can see that treatment of the character there. Lastly, we have people who were influenced by Mauldin, and one remarkable influence is Charles Schulz, the creator of Peanuts. You can see this in his Snoopy in the Trenches, a parody of a war comic. Charles Schulz was also in the war. He also served in the very end of combat, and he was really into making a war comic, but eventually there were so many of them at the time after the war, he ended up making this kind of little kids comic, Peanuts. But he still really admired Mauldin and really liked his treatment of mud especially. You can see that in the way he handles ink. So these are the ways we talk about our comics. We make descriptions of one thing, and then we make comparisons. And I'm going to ask you to do this on our image identification, and we're going to ask you again to do this in our exams. When you look at a picture, talk about it, say what it is, how it's related to other pictures. Okay, so this is what we do as art historians. We talk about pictures, and we talk about how they relate to each other. Another assignment you're going to have in this class is this definitions assignment. Basically, I have a list of terms I'm going to give you, and then you're going to look through the image collection to find an example of that term. And it's very important that you find that example. It's not enough just to define the term. You need to demonstrate that you understand what that term is by showing me a picture of something that's related. So, for our first term, we're going to choose the words monoscenic narrative, which is basically meaning a single picture that tells the whole story. Okay, these sort of single panel comics that Bill Mauldin were making are essentially monoscenic narratives. The whole story is there. There's not another panel ahead of this or behind this in a sequence of images, okay? So Bill Mauldin's comics are monoscenic narratives, and there's a long history of monoscenic narratives and other pictures, stories way in the past. So what is a monoscenic narrative? Okay, Bill Mauldin's war comic, Didn't We Meet at Casino, is an example of a monoscenic narrative because it represents a single scene with no repetition of characters. Okay, so there I've given the example and I've explained that I understand what this term means by giving it a clear example. Moving on to our midterm and final exam, I'm going to choose 5 pictures from the image collection, and I'm going to have you choose 3 of the 5 to write an essay about, just as I've described earlier. And then you're going to give it comparisons as well. Okay? Next in the exam is going to be a short answer. I'll have essay questions that you will answer in 3 or 4 sentences, and then you're going to give an example from the image collection, demonstrating again that you understand what this answer means by picking an appropriate example from the image collection. And lastly on the exam, there's going to be a mystery images. Pick 3 images and you identify 2 of the 3. Tell me what it is. You should be familiar with it. Even though it's a picture you will not have seen before, you should be able to tell me what it is and who made it and where it comes from, because it'll be very similar to something you'd seen before. In this class, we have a number of large research projects. One is the EWP paper. You're expected to write at least 800 words on a topic of your choice relating to the history of comics. I'll give you a list of topics you can choose from or adapt your own personal interests into, and then from that you can go and start to develop first a proposal, which is just a paragraph written with 25 images on a Pinterest board that'll tell me the kinds of pictures you want to use in writing your paper. Next, you're going to have an outline where you're going to choose the 10 images you're really going to focus on after I've given you your feedback on your proposal. And in your outline, you're going to show me the order and explain why they're in that order. Again, just another paragraph description. And lastly, at the end of the class, you're going to write the actual paper. You're going to put the images in the paper in a sequence, and you're going to explain how these images describe and explain the topic that you have chosen. Another very fun and interesting project everyone will do in this class is we make comics. I'm going to lead you through 3 short comic assignments on 1 page, and then at the end of the semester you're going to build a 6-page comic. Okay, this is a big challenge, but it's one I think you will enjoy and one that will give you a deep appreciation of what it is to make comics and be sensitive to the kinds of decisions that comic artists make when they make their comics. The comic can really be about anything. I recommend fairy tales just because they have a story that's already there. I only say it can't be based on a movie. So if you have a fairy tale you're doing, don't do Disney's Pinocchio or Aladdin or what have you. It really needs to be a fairy tale based on the original story as it's been collected in the ancient books. Okay? We have weekly discussions in this class. Please log on a regular basis and check in on what people are saying, contribute meaningful, thoughtful ideas about the readings and the lectures. And you can put your own personal reflections on those questions. I will invite you to bring your own experiences to bear, but please stay focused on the topic. Don't go too far afield. Lastly, at the end of the semester, because this is a senior seminar, we will do presentations. And in these, I will just have a phone conversation with you one-on-one, and I'll ask you questions about your comic you made and the EWP paper that you've written, and your process for writing and composing and creating each of those. So as I said, this class is self-paced to a certain degree, but literally every week there are assignments you need to do, things you need to be working on. You have to check in on a regular basis if you want to complete this class successfully, okay? I want to help you. Please let me know if you're having any technical difficulty in completing the course, and I will do what I can to help you complete this class as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But it's very important that you stay on top of the work, because after a certain point you cannot make up old or missing assignments. All right? All right. Good luck. Talk to you soon.